I'm going to talk about a number of different things. You know, one of the things that we were discussing earlier is this notion of and one of the reasons I titled my book Jobs for Robots Between Robocalypse and Robotopia is that there's a reductive tendency to tell one of two narratives, right? And like most people who have a book, you know, I've got a team of people who are running Facebook ads, and they're mad at me. They're mad at me because they wish my book was Robots Destroy the World or Robots Give Everyone Free Money, because that would be way better clickbait, but it doesn't really enhance the discourse. It doesn't actually make for a better discussion. Right? And that's actually what I think is important, right? There's no room for nuance in the way that we currently often discuss these kinds of topics. And that was the reason I wrote Jobs for Robots. It really bothered me that at the one end of the spectrum, everyone was telling this sort of Terminator story, and at the other end of the spectrum, there's, well, free money for everyone, and we'll get to my thoughts on that in a little bit. You've heard kind of the brief intro about what I do. Just to kind of share a couple things that I do to share what my perspective is and where it's coming from. I run a research shop called Prestige Economics. I'm also the chairman of something called the Futurist Institute. We're rolling out a professional designation platform. It's in process now. We'll have those out before the end of the summer. I also write for Bloomberg View. I write a column for Bloomberg Profits. I'm the futurist for the Hyperloop Massachusetts Global Challenge team. So that's one of the 11 remaining Hyperloop teams out there. It's the only one in the Boss Wash corridor. I also write for MHI, which is the material handling industry, and that is really important when we think about where e-commerce is going. So I do a lot of work and research for them, including generating an economic indicator on a monthly basis about material handling. And again, that's supply chain stuff, e-commerce, we'll talk about that stuff. And Hedgefly, which is the startup I also run. We're working on a multi-vendor risk management platform, and that'll be coming out towards the end of the year. I'm also a technical advisor to the bot generator Sales Racer. I'm a member of a few different groups as well that gives me different perspective and visibility over things. I'm a member of CTAN, the Central Texas Angel Network. It is the most active angel investing network in the world. So I see a lot of stuff being an angel investor who's active in this most active network. It's more active than anything in California or in New York. CTAN's the number one group, and I'm in it. I'm also a member of the Texas Business Leadership Council, which is comprised of 125 CEOs in the state of Texas who advise the elected officials of the state, and I'm a member of NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors, and the EO Accelerator, which is an entrepreneur organization. So I do a few different things, and I talk to a lot of different people. I forecast some stuff that you've heard I've been top ranked for, and I focus very much in a lot of my conversations, whether we're talking short-term market stuff, medium-term economic trends, or long-term issues, on the future of work. And this is one of the reasons I really sat down and wrote Jobs for Robots, is I was continually faced with the questions, what do we think about in the longer term? How do we think about these things, and what's a good framing for it? Now, robots are, to quote the movie Zoolander, right? Like Hansel, they're so hot right now. And the proof is in the Google Trends data, right? This is the future of work. And so the Google searches are up. People are thinking about this. And as I would tell you about the future of work, one of the things that I would say, if you want to know where we're going, I think looking back is really important. Now, the story that we hear from the Robocalypse is that this time is different. Right? And I think many of you know this time is never different, right? But this time is different, and it's different because we just won't be able to handle what's going to happen with the robots. Now, I'd like you to think for a second, and I think that sometimes words have weight, right? Does anybody know what the most common last name is in the United States? Smith. That's right. 1% of the population has the last name Smith. And being a blacksmith was an occupation from about 1500 BC until about 1850. I mean, now if you want to see someone doing this, you got to go to a Renaissance fair, and that person's last name is probably not Smith. But the point is that this was very disruptive in a way that is often glossed over when we talk about the future of work. I mean, what professional opportunities did you have in 1850 when factories really started taking these jobs away? What education opportunities? You pretty much had to walk down the road to someone else's house and ask them if they need something for you to do, right? There's no, in-hand career search. There's no in-hand training. You can't do a degree online. You can't even call anybody to see if there's jobs. Newspapers don't exist in all cities. So this was probably far more disruptive than whatever we're going to face. I mean, after all, how many people here would pick their last name based on their current occupation? Anybody? Right? But Smith, Weaver, Tanner, Miller, right? These were occupations that largely don't exist anymore. And so there's a few things I'd say to contextualize the debate about the future of work. And one is that because we've had this experience, no one in here is going to pick the last name. I'm Jason, project manager, or, my wife, Ashley, a computer programmer. No one's going to do this, right? I'm not going to be, thinking that way. No one's going to do that, right? And so the future of work is going to be different, and the changes will be more rapid, but they might not be as catastrophic as what we've seen in the past, right? So it's maybe more of that slow boil, but if we remain adaptive enough, and by the way, there will be increasing solutions that we can leverage, then you would expect over time that we're going to adapt to it. And this is really what I draw a lot of my expectations around looking backward. A few things I'd also say is that if we think about the past of work, we also need to talk about museums of work, right? And maybe some of you have been to this kind of thing, like a mill, and I actually was just earlier this month, I was in the Netherlands, and they used to have 1,000+ windmills, right? There are 13 left in the country, right? So if you want to see one that, right, you can go. There's a half a dozen of them in one spot, and that's a thing. But in the future, and I do believe that you're going to see things like telecommuting increase. The question is this then the future museum of work? So I think you're going to see a number of rapid changes, and I think you're going to see where you work, how you work change. But a lot of this is already going on. Right? In the same way that you could have, there were a number of companies that moved in the late 90s to delivery services, but it was just too early for the tech. Things like telecommuting have been going on for a while. I mean, I worked in consulting 10 years ago when no one had an office and everyone was telecommuting. So, and senior partners had offices, but generally no one else did, and it was flex space. That kind of stuff is just going to accelerate. That's already in process. We're already used to that. I think people realize these things are going to change and advance more rapidly over time, but I don't think it's going to be that much different than what we already know is out there, right? The future, in many ways, a lot of the things are already out there. Now, there are changes you see and changes you don't. And so I want to talk about some of the changes that you see and what they mean. And I want to talk about some changes that you might not. So let's talk about changes you see. So I'm both an economist and a futurist. And back in 2004, this is me giving a speech at the Philadelphia Fed. I'm quite a bit younger. My hair's a bit longer. And the computer is definitely older. So a few things I want to say about this. In 2004, those of you who watch financial markets, this is what a Fed statement looked like, right? A couple paragraphs long. It's quite short. This is the calendar. This is the Fed statement from January 2004. This is what a Fed statement from September of 2016 looks like, right? So there's been an increase in the length of the statements. This is what the calendar looked like in 2004. And Fed minutes were released about a month and a half after, or were released a couple of weeks after the second meeting. So if you had a meeting, you would release the minutes not 2 weeks after that meeting, but 2 weeks after the following meeting. Currently, it's changed. The calendar looks like this. You now do press conferences. You release the Fed minutes just a couple weeks after a Fed decision. So the statements have gotten longer. The calendar's gotten crowded. In addition to all that, you've also got other data that's been created. You've got these things called the dot plot. You've got these forecast projections. This is that dot plot that you hear about, CNBC, Bloomberg. He's trying to figure out which Fed member is making which set of forecasts. And again, the statement here is just full of all this data. And the question is, does it matter? And in August of last year, Janet Yellen said, our ability to predict how the federal funds rate will evolve over time is quite limited. And so I think this shows us that although we've got access to more data in some cases, it might not be very useful. And this is the Fed. So, right, they're cranking out a lot more data. They're cranking out all these forecasts and the dot plot and the statements longer. And so you've got a lot more information being shared with maybe not much value. So I think there's a couple takeaways here. That you hear about how data is, we're generating now so much more data with memory and storage space is so much cheaper. And that's all true, and we're going to be collecting it. But if you don't utilize it the right way, it might not be worth anything. So just because you have the data doesn't mean it's worth something. And I think that's an important takeaway. But we're going to see more of this happen. And its predictive value, even among, you'd think, if you ask me who should know what's going on in the economy, it's probably the Fed. And they've ramped up all this extra stuff, and it's worth nothing. What does that mean for any company collecting data? What does that mean for anyone analyzing it? So I think this is really important that we should always be asking ourselves, is the juice worth the squeeze? And on the tech side, I would tell a great story because I think as we look at the future of work, sometimes the answer isn't always the most technologically advanced, and the initial iterations will probably not always be the most advanced. I've got a friend of mine I've known for many years and a former colleague, and he's got a startup, and he wanted to have something, basically it's an image, and it needed to be sort of hidden and then revealed in a certain way, nanotechnology, an invisible sort of ink thing. And, in doing the iterations of, what would the process look like, sometimes the rush is, okay, let's use a 3D printer and let's do something complicated. But in actuality, the iteration should be as simple as possible. I would also share that, interestingly, a large corporation that I have had a working relationship with over time has made significant strides in cutting its costs by starting with a process that involved hand jamming. It was picking up a phone and calling people day after day in a slow, iterative process. Now they're at a point where they're going to appify what they're doing, and you're getting the rapid benefits, but the initial phases are still going to be very manual in order to maintain cost controls. So I think it's important to get the questions right. And this is an area, if we think about the future of work and we think about strategy, this is something that robots are probably going to be very poor at. Specifying the question, right? Einstein said that if you had an hour to solve a question, you spend 55 minutes figuring out what the question is, and then 5 minutes getting to the answer. And that's going to remain the case. I mean, how many of us have sat in meetings where you've got a bunch of people and you think you know what you're talking about, and yet you're still kind of trying to triangulate what you're actually getting to? That's not going to get easier with increased AI or tech. You still need to know what you're asking. And project management will not get easier. You still need to make sure that the process is getting to the question you're trying to answer. Now, there's other changes that you don't see, and I think some of these are interesting. So I go to OPEC meetings. I was at one just last week in Vienna. I go to almost every one. I missed one a couple of years ago. It was on Thanksgiving, but generally I'm going to every one. And here's a picture of the room. I took this myself. You can see that the Saudi delegation is in traditional garb. You've got ministers around the table, right? And after, this is the meeting in November of 2016 where they cut oil production. But before they got to the discussion of cutting oil production, they talked about the UI UX of their new app. Can't make this stuff up. Didn't get much traction, but it happened. There it is. Discussing the different functionalities and the UI UX of their app. So, I think everyone knows this stuff is coming. Everyone's on board with this, but this was even a priority above talking about cutting oil production, right? This is the first thing they did in the meeting. Now, there's another secret I'll tell you about OPEC meetings people don't know. You can bring your mom. But, but the app thing is maybe better, but no, that's really my mom, and that's really an OPEC meeting. So, true story. But aside from that, and the increased appification, right? If OPEC's going there, and the consumer focus is going to accelerate, we need to realize why are they doing this is tied to the fact that the self-service revolution is real. And that you're going to continue to see, moving forward, everything that happens in the economy is to improve relationships with customers, is to give people better access to whatever they're looking for. And this is that self-service revolution. And I think we're all aware about different sort of kiosk things, right? These are Burger King kiosks, and there's some English and there's some Spanish. But what's important here is that this isn't California, this isn't Texas, this is Barcelona, Spain. And last year in Barcelona, youth unemployment was over 40%, and total unemployment was over 20%. And yet, kiosks were still working instead of people. So a couple things I'd say about this, and the most important is, no matter what the labor market in a certain place looks like, if the labor and tax incentives in place incentivize away from people, that's what employers will do. No matter what the labor, right? You get a lot of slack in the labor market when you have youth unemployment 40 to 45%. But that doesn't matter because the incentives are for kiosks. Now, these might be what we call evil kiosks because they're taking people's jobs in a place with 40% plus unemployment. Maybe a happier kiosk is one that serves cupcakes. But that this one's got a robotic arm. This one's in Austin. And the unemployment rate in Austin is exceptionally low. But these kinds of robots actually generate more work because this is a material handling last mile solution rather than simply taking an order. What I'd say is a few things on this. You're going to see this self-service kind of thing move. You're seeing it already rolling out in a number of places. So if we think about the future of work, there's already glimmers of what that's going to be. I think the future of retail and the kioskification process is an area where you're already seeing things change. This is the Lobot. Lowe's Stores has these puppies out. I was at the Robo Business Conference last fall, and this thing takes you to whatever you're looking for. You go to one of these stores and you're like, I need a hammer, and they tell you it's aisle 83 or it's aisle 4, right? And this will tell you where it is. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the cameras on the side that do inventory management, and they do a real-time audit as they're taking you to that hammer you need. So now, overnight, these puppies can audit a store what might have taken days or weeks for a team of people before. Now, I don't know, is anybody here an accountant? Anybody here? No? Okay, so one of the least exciting things you probably are going to do is literally count stacks hammers or blocks of wood. I mean, I've done audit stuff before too. This is not the highest dollar value of someone who has an accounting degree and might be a CPA or on their way to being a CPA. So this kind of thing should free you up for higher billable hour purpose. And that's really important to think about, because just like with a lot of the technology used now, future tech that we see developed over the next 10, 20 years is still going to be designed to augment your professional capabilities and drive you to your highest dollar value capabilities, right? Think about what you do does anybody here spend 100% of their day doing their highest dollar value item? Anybody? Right? No, right? I have yet to see someone. I gave a speech last month. There were 1,000 people, still no hands. So this is pretty normal. We spend a lot of our time doing stuff we don't need to be doing, or that's quite tedious. Anything like that will be gone. Think about what your highest dollar value professional skill is, and try to do as much of that as possible, because in the future, every technological thing will be pushing you to that highest dollar value. Is it your highest dollar value to drive to the store and go try to find some stuff to buy? No, it's not, right? That's why e-commerce is on the rise. Is it your highest dollar value to be crunching certain kind of data, literally counting cords of wood? No, no. So this is something that you should see and be aware of moving forward, that this is going to go on. Now, when we think about e-commerce, I always love to do this because folks, this is my favorite question to ask. And before we get into e-commerce, I want to ask you a question. And the question is, how much e-commerce is there? In other words, what percent of current retail sales do you think e-commerce is? Right? I want you to think of a number, because I know, look, I live in a cul-de-sac 7 days a week. There's people driving in and out, dropping stuff off. It's the postal service, it's parcel shippers, it's randos in cars dropping stuff off all day long, every day, 7 days a week. What percent of all retail do you think e-commerce is? Okay, just think of a number. And I know you're a sharp group, so I know you know it's 8.5%. So that's the trick, gang. Were you thinking of something a little higher maybe? Right? Maybe, right? Yeah. So here's the trick. We're not talking about e-commerce at 50% or 30%. What happens when e-commerce is 17%? Double what it is now. How many robots are we going to need, right? We're going to need all the robots, right? That's last mile solutions will be the technological challenge of the next 20 years. How do you get all this stuff to people? The U.S. supply chain is designed to deliver batches and pallets of stuff to retail sources, not single pieces highly customized to everyone. And yet I've already said the self-service revolution is real, right? The retail store of the future is in your hand, right? It's already the retail store of the present. That's the new brick and mortar. It's wherever you are. And that's going to accelerate, right? We hit a new record in Q1, and that's the 8.5. And we're going to keep hitting new records. But there's this move, you're going to continue to see the supply chain is pushed to you. Even sort of more interesting things where we think about the end of the supply chain, things like the Amazon Go store where you're just going to kind of walk in and grab stuff and walk out. You're still part of the supply chain essentially, because it's all still running through your phone. Now, these last mile solutions, so material handling, which is warehousing, distribution, all of that stuff, that's moving increasingly to automation. There's been a lot of it now. There's been a lot of robotics. That's where you've got the dissemination of these packages going from batches and pallets to single piece dispatching, right? But the question is, how are we going to get it, once it's dispatched from warehouse and distribution, how do we get it out to people? And that's where you're going to have challenges. So these, the flying drones, the drones on the road, all kinds of stuff, solutions we haven't even thought of yet. Different automated vehicles we haven't even dreamed up are going to be part of this solution. Because everyone wants it highly customized. We want it today. We want it right now. And that's going to That's going to drive everything. The U.S. consumer drives most of the economy anyway. 60 to 70% of GDP is consumption. And if consumers want more, now, my hand is the new brick and mortar, that's going to accelerate, and that will change fundamentally everything about how the economy operates. Now, along those lines, I would say that's going to create a lot of business opportunity. That's going to create a lot of jobs. There are areas where you're going to see them lost, and that's in department stores, right? We've already started to see this in a pretty big way. There's been a huge drop since the peak in 2001 for jobs, retail jobs in department stores. They've fallen from about 1.8 million to now it's 1.2, 1.3. You've lost almost a third of the jobs in this sector in just the last 15-ish years. That's going to continue. You're going to see still the restaurants or the new retail thing happen because people want to commune with each other. But as for e-commerce, that's going to accelerate no matter what for physical goods purchases. Now, along those lines, those last mile solutions will be tied to how transportation is changing. And of course, we got to talk about self-driving cars. And has anybody been in one? Okay, great. We can't talk about it, but okay, yeah, great. So we definitely can't talk about it, but they're ready, right? So in my opinion, it's ready.
It's creepy, but it's ready.
It's ready. So I didn't say the creepy part, but it's ready, right? So the challenge is, and there's been a lot written about the platform as a service model, that eventually the notion is people don't have their own cars and these things just pick you up and there's no cars anymore and everything's dispatched and it's awesome. But just like everything is between Robocalypse and Robotopia, right? Isn't that awesome? The car's just going around and they drive everybody, and this is awesome, right? So there's going to be some job losses, but there's a big challenge to this process. It's not the technology, it's not the insurance, it's not even the car owners. The biggest challenge about self-driving cars is that people are gross. And so it's true. So, imagine what you've seen or heard about people doing in taxis when there's a driver there, or an Uber when someone's there, or anybody here lived in a college town taking a cab on a Thursday night, Thirsty Thursday? Anybody? Right? So, So this is the problem. You're going to need to clean these things more than you refuel them. So I think that's a real thing. I'm not, I wish I was making this up. And honestly, my wife's the one who really pushed me on this thought. So I really have to give credit to her. But, it's true. If these things start taking kids around to soccer games, they got to go to the bathroom. Like, this is like a real thing. This is going to be a real challenge. If you ask me, it's not, there's going to be a couple ends of the market. There's going to be the high end of the market where, I want to go buy my own. And there's going to be the rest where it's public transport without feeling like there's anyone there. That's going to be the strange part. And that's where the people are gross part becomes a problem. So I think that's the challenge we have to overcome. And so it's not perfect and it's not imperfect, but there's an actual real human challenge that we need to be thinking about. Now, in terms of jobs at risk, one of the other shadow sides of the automation of transportation, of course, is that it's one of the main categories of workers. Retail salespeople are the number one. These are the most common jobs in America. Retail salesperson is number one. Cashier is number two. Bottom of the list is truck drivers. It's still about 1.5 million jobs. These jobs will probably cease to exist in the not too distant future. In the 1970s, the most common occupation by state, anyone know what it was? The most common occupation in a plurality of states? 1970s, any idea? Secretary. That was it. And today, we generally won't even use the word secretary. And what a secretary did then, we now all probably do with some sort of computer program for our emails and such, right? And in the same way that we wouldn't even use the word secretary now, 30 years from now, we will probably not use the word truck driver. Now, centrally automated vehicle engineer, that might be a thing, but it will look nothing like what we think of as truck driver today. In terms of where job growth will be, and I've talked about sort of the shadow side and a couple areas that are at risk. I would also point out that the fastest growing jobs, most of these are in healthcare. And that's an area that's going to be very slow to be replaced. I don't think school nurses anytime soon are going to be replaced by robots, right? Because there's a human contact element that's part of the gig. I would say the same. You look at physical therapists, occupational therapists, any sorts of analyses around jobs where there's job creation and they're not going to be automated. It's stuff that's either highly customized or requires high human contact, right? If we think about even something like construction, yes, you can 3D print buildings, and I know some folks in startups that do these, and you might be able to paint the buildings with army of small paint drones, but something you probably won't be able to do is change the plumbing that's inside a house that exists very easily. Every house is custom, the pipes are all different in every room. That's not going to change, right? Same thing with electrical wiring. So those kinds of things are still going to require, it's just not going to be, the juice is not going to be worth the squeeze on the robot side for that stuff. We're going to have to 80-20 it. For most new jobs also, the majority of these categories are also in healthcare. Jobs requiring IT skills are going up, right? You need IT skills. STEM jobs are going to remain in high demand. This is going to accelerate, right? If we're trying to get our economy to the highest dollar value of everyone's potential, this is what we're going to see. And by the way, tech jobs have a much higher multiplier than any other kind of job. In other words, each tech job creates more other jobs than anything else. So STEM's going to remain hot. Now, in terms of being robot-proof, there's a couple of thoughts that I want to share. And the first is that education's a big divider. This is a report that came out in December 2016 from the Office of the President. The percent of jobs that are highly automatable vary by education level. If you have less than a high school diploma that is required for your job, 44% of those are highly automatable. If you have an associate's degree or trade school certificate is required for your job, it's only 8%. Bachelor's degree is 1%. If you need a graduate degree to do your job, 0% are highly automatable. Just like with unemployment rates, education is the great divider. Which is why our greatest weapon against the Robocalypse is a green room. So I've been to a number of green rooms, do a lot of TV. I did Bloomberg. I hosted yesterday morning for an hour. I do a lot of TV and been in a lot of green rooms. And the last time I was at Bloomberg, I shared one with Travis, the CEO of Uber. What's interesting, a green room, of course, is not a green screen room. This is where you sit before you go on camera. This one is the one that blew my mind the most out of any green room I've ever been to. This is at UT Austin, where it's one of the largest universities in the country. They have, like an 80s sitcom, a live studio audience in place for the courses that they are now doing online. And there's a mandate to greatly increase the number of courses that they're doing online. And of course, you can go from a couple hundred people to 1,000 plus. And you've got the little microphones, and people come in based on their TA group, or they wait like for Saturday Night Live in case there's a seat that someone's not taking. You hope to get into the actual class. Now, for now, the price point on a lot of formal education online courses is very close to where the in-person experience is, but the marginal cost to produce these is quite low, which means over time you're going to see the cost to attend these, the price to attend these will go down. So you're going to see every university want to get into this game. And so you're going to have a bifurcated future, just like there is with the self-driving cars, where maybe I have my own and I put an office in it. There's like a dog bed for my Chi-Chi, and like I trick it out, whatever, and I tell it to take me to Houston or Dallas or wherever, as opposed to being part of the fleet. The education system will be bifurcated, where everyone could do a formal education online, but if you want the in-person experience, the cost is multiples of what it is today. So I think that's going to continue in the same way that you might take a French class in high school, or you might know people who relocated to France for a year so their kids could learn French. Right? That's what the future will look like for education. MOOCs and SMOCs. MOOCs are the massive open online courses, and SMOCs are simultaneous massive online courses. Those are going to help. They've been accelerating. They're going parabolic. Even I have a set of courses coming out this summer as part of the Futurist Institute with a professional designation. So I think this is really the direction that people need to go. More education, more learning, because as things change in the workforce, you're going to have to be more adaptive. Right? It won't be a one-time catastrophic experience like in the Industrial Revolution, but it's a series of continual learning processes, continual changes, and a need to always be learning and always be adaptive. Now, while that's potentially the best weapon against a robocalypse, there is, I think, a more dangerous course for Robocalypse, and there is one politician that has set us down a very dangerous path. And I know we're all thinking of the same person. We're all thinking of Otto von Bismarck, right? This picture comes from the Social Security Administration website. Wish I could make this up. He is considered the grandfather of U.S. Social Security. Otto was not the chancellor of warm hearts and snugs. He was the iron and blood chancellor, right? He's a guy who really pulled Germany together as a country. And in the 1880s, he was up against the Socialist Party that was gaining strength. So Otto had an idea. Let's do a top-down implementation of the initial thing that looked like Social Security. And there will be a trick. We'll give the benefits at age 70. Anyone know what the average age of life expectancy in Germany in the 1880s was? 50, 54. Anybody else? 40. So that's math that works, right? There's like a 30-year gap, right? This is perfect. Now look, life expectancy's doubled. So let's look at Otto for a solution to our entitlements problems, right? Life expectancy went from 40 to 80. So if benefits were 70, at 140 years old, we all get benefits, and that's Otto's kind of plan, right? So we could be more conservative and say life expectancy's gone up 40 years, to go from 70 to 110. But you get the point. The idea is no one gets paid. Problem is, we live longer than the benefits, and so the system is a bit lopsided, right? So by the year 2030, the current government budget of GDP, which is about 18.1% of GDP, that's been the average for a little while now, that will be equal to Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and the interest on our debt. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, the entire government budget, 18.1% of GDP. Good news, no IRS. Bad news, no military, no anything else. Just entitlements and the interest on the debt. That's it. It's all we can afford in 2030 because of this system. So, and I'm talking about this because there's a couple of reasons. And there's problems here, and there's big implications for robots. Anybody know how, I think most people know, how this is funded, right? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, payroll taxes. People pay payroll taxes. Employers have been freaking out about Obamacare costs going up. Wait till payroll taxes go from 15 to 25%. Watch what happens then. That's a problem. And the problem is, it all goes back to demographics. In 1940, there were over 159 workers per Social Security recipient. Today, it's 2.8, and it's going down. So here's the thing. We can sit here all day and debate whether the future will be a robotopia or whether it will be a robocalypse. But what none of us will debate is that companies respond to tax incentives. And if the tax incentives in place do not change, companies could be well over-incentivized to automate everything. So this is the crux of the future. Surprise, surprise, it's tax policy and education. That's what will determine how this plays out. Now, there's a big secret about future technology, and I'm going to share it. I know I shared the one secret, you can bring your mom to OPEC. But the second secret I'd share, I think a lot of us know about things like fintech, right? There's this algo trading stuff going on. This is gold prices. As someone who produces financial market research, I would tell you that people read reports, but robo-advisors and algorithms do not read reports. What they like are lines on charts. Lines are real easy. This blue line I had in place beginning back in January of 2016, the day after it crosses, it starts a big sell-off. This is gold. Now, I could show you technical charts like this for oil and for the stock market. I watch 9 markets every week, and I'm a chartered market technician. This is a real thing. In December of 2014, I emailed my clients to tell them I was going to be doing more technical analysis. And for many, many years, people always sort of poo-pooed this sort of thing, and this doesn't mean anything. And I had one of the major central banks that I advise 2 of the major 3 foreign central banks, and the head of trading in one of those banks emailed me. And I thought for sure I was going to get an email that said, what are you doing? This technical analysis stuff is garbage. It's chart tracing. I thought I was going to get it, right? I mean, this is a guy at a central bank who trades FX for their desk. I open the email and it says, thank you so much for doing this. This has become so important. This drives everything in the markets now. Says someone at a central bank. Okay. So when we talk about long-termism and investing, we need to realize that long-term is just as long as a candle. And just like they say in the movie Wall Street, right by 4 you're a dinosaur, right? So that's pretty much how this is what's going to happen. The last thing I'll share, and this is the big secret, is everyone knows about this, right? Fintech, these robo-advising, algo trading, robots taking the jobs, this stuff everyone knows. This is an ad I saw in an airport. We believe mutual funds should be managed by humans, not robots. And this was hanging in an airport in Texas. Now, when you think of fintech, I know you're a smart group. When you think of fintech in Texas, and you think of places where everything I've talked about, the future of work, robo-advising, algo trading, when you think of somewhere where this is something that the people really know about, that has permeated the zeitgeist, what city do you think of in Texas?
Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. Wrong. I know you were kidding. Dallas. Oh, you guys are kidding me. You know it. You know this is from Amarillo. It is. This is from Amarillo last July. Here's the thing, guys. Everybody knows. Everybody. And with that, I'll just close off with a couple of things. The standard disclaimer. The rankings, which I talked about earlier, we've been top ranked in 36 categories by Bloomberg since 2011. And I have a weekly newsletter goes out, The Financial Futurist. It includes a podcast as well. So if you want to be on the list, come up, take a card, send me an email, or give me your card, and I'll make sure you get on the list. And you can also follow me on Twitter at PrestigeEcon. I have a few 100,000 tweets. You can follow me there. I post stuff. So, yeah, and at this point, I'm happy to take questions if you have, and I thank you all very much for being here. Thank you. Please, sir.
When you brought up that the only concern for smart cars is I just happen to think about hacking, and I'm wondering if that costs you money.
Yeah, so the question is hacking an issue for self-driving cars? I think for technology, this is a big problem in general. Cybersecurity is a growing issue. It's a growing challenge, and it's something that every government, every company now has to deal with as a reality of life. I think that's a normal problem that I think we realize. Hack cars, that's bad if they're self-driving. I think what people aren't thinking about is sort of the human element to the actual implementation. So when we get to the actual pragmatic, how does it work? That's I think people realize that's a challenge. Please, sir.
It's fantastic, by the way. Bravo.
Thank you.
The green room, I missed the detail, the color on that. Would you say that's like a
Yeah, so before...
conversations are going to go on? Like when Travis was there with you?
Right. So the color with the green room is, this is a university, right? And they have a green room. That used to be a classroom, right? And so now, instead of a classroom where people actually take classes, this university has a green room, right? There's no longer students sitting there. It's where you put your makeup on, right? Like just like you would have at Bloomberg or CNBC or something like this. And so, it's professors who are going into these rooms, but the fact that a university has a green room is to me, mind-blowing.
Implications around transformation of education.
That's right. So, and I think that's right. And I apologize, I didn't fully connect that dot on that one, but that's...
Now it makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. That's the thing is when I think of places with green rooms, the last thing I think of is a school, but I think we're going to increasingly see that. And we're going to see changes to, I only talked about higher ed, but we're going to see changes throughout the entire education structure. I think reverse classrooms and the like, where you see the change in the style and the methodology and the implementation of learning to be more interactive and more video based. And this stuff is going to accelerate over time. We already see it, but 20, 30 years from now, it will be much more. That'll be pretty much probably all there is. So, please.
So I'm interested in Bitcoin. I invested heavily in Bitcoin, and my concern is where you see cryptocurrencies going and where you see gold and silver, because the whole purpose of getting Bitcoin was to make a profit to buy physical gold and silver, and where do you see currency as a whole in this country?
Okay, so a few things. So the question is around Bitcoin, but I'll also talk about blockchain and currencies. As well as precious metals. I won't make any recommendations around this. This is not investment advice. So in the fall, Bitcoin made an announcement to greatly reduce the mining rewards, which is the way that currency is created, right? Normally the Fed, there's a printing press, right? But with something like Bitcoin, the miners who process the transactions are given rewards for the speed at which they process the transactions, and that was halved last year at the end of the year. So that's something that I think has contributed to the increase in the valuation. The second thing is, it's not yet clear if this is the final form or the iteration. And as with everything in technology, adaptation is going to be important. And for something like Bitcoin, I think a very big concern is something like hacking, right? And we've seen a couple of hacking events. No one's going to hack the Fed you could in theory hack the Federal Reserve, but you're not going to hack the value of the dollar or in a way that the dollar is suddenly losing value. Bitcoin is exposed to something like that. And in terms of cryptocurrencies and precious metals, if we look back in time, so there was an Austrian economist, Friedrich August von Hayek, I actually did one of my master's thesis on. He had postulated that gold would not be a good thing to go back to for currencies. And there's a very simple reason. The minute you say you're going back to a gold standard, people who own the gold, super excited because the price of gold goes up, but then the price of gold goes up so much that it's not a viable means of transaction. One of the main reasons we got off the gold standard and went to the dollar to begin with wasn't because the dollar was so great, it's just there were enough of them. And at some point you just need enough to transact on. And there isn't another currency that's liquid enough for you to transact on. And whether we're talking about physical goods or we're talking general commodities, that's why this stuff is priced in dollars. Because there's just a lot of them, right? So for gold and silver, as we see problems with taxation and balancing the entitlements, which by the way, we talk about the national debt, right? The national debt is $20 trillion in the US. All sovereign debt, so all the debt of all the countries in the world is $60 trillion. Our Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security obligation is an unfunded $200 trillion. It is 10 times the size of the national debt. That's the big problem. Not the current debt or this year's budget. It's this $200 trillion problem. When that becomes bigger, that poses upside risk. for gold and silver. Silver is also more tied to manufacturing than gold is. So it's more exposed to things like dynamics in Chinese manufacturing. But in general, I don't think we're going to go back to one of those because there's not enough gold or silver to transact on. And fiat currency is in place. But Hayek also said that token currencies could work, and that's really Bitcoin is, Hayek dreams of Bitcoin really in many ways, or other cryptocurrencies. So it does solve the problem because it's what you call a token currency, but in the same way that the dollar isn't backed by anything, neither are cryptocurrencies. Please.
You shared the list of the most common jobs in America that are going to be robotized. I noticed that elementary school teachers was on that list.
That's not the most common jobs that will be robotized. Those are the most common jobs currently in the United States.
Okay, not necessarily.
No. Those jobs are going to be less exposed. Jobs that are professional in education, especially younger education, those are much less likely to be automated or computerized or robotized. So that was just what are the top jobs in the economy right now. Number one is retail, and sort of at the bottom of the list is trucking, and the top, I think it's 10, 15 jobs. But that's not the list of jobs that will be automated. That's just the current state of the economy. Okay, great. The lady in the back, please.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I think you mentioned that you watched 9 markets. Can you tell me what markets they are and why you chose those?
Sure. So every week I do technical analysis on the Dow, the NASDAQ, the dollar, the euro, gold, nat gas, crude oil, or I think I said crude. It's aluminum, copper, nat gas, gold, crude, dollar, euro, Dow, NASDAQ. Those are the 9 every week.
Why did you choose those over all the others?
So I think, the dollar and the euro are critical from a currency standpoint, global economy. And if we sort of think about the most important economies out there, that's why I watch those. For the Dow and the NASDAQ, the technicals on those are quite important. So that's why I watch those. And of course, they're a very good proxy for the health of equities. For WTI crude, I watch that because I have a lot of commodities clients, and oil is also important for inflation. For aluminum and copper, I watch that again. That's more a physical source of demand, also a good proxy on what's going on in China and the health of the global economy. Nat gas is more domestic inflation issue, and gold is sort of a currency risk proxy. But I also watch those because those are, in my mind, the most interesting markets and the most important if we're taking a holistic macro view at the world. Thank you. Sir.
So I just wanted to, just for euro,
Sure.
it's about 940, so I'm not
Okay.
sure what you're...
Then we'll do one more, and then we'll wrap it up. Please.
Great talk. Thanks so much.
Sure.
It sounds like humanity does face some interesting challenges and opportunities here. One challenge might be that $200 trillion mountain you cite on his liabilities, right? I know, one of your main points there near the end was tax policy is an issue here, an important one. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear what your recommendations would be for how humanity can, overcome some of these challenges, find these opportunities, maybe even together in a movement sort of scenario. What would be key, you think? Yeah, what are your...
Well, I think the first key is we have to, the entitlements problem probably needs to be addressed sooner rather than later because it doesn't get better, it gets worse. I think increasing access to education of all kinds, formal, informal, online, in-person. Look, we're moving to an intellectual capital economy, right? Now, it's not just a service economy, manufacturing economy, ag economy, like that kind of thing, right? Everything we do is becoming more intellectually based. And although AI and machine learning can do some stuff, again, most of it, 95% of the work is framing the question, and that's what we're here for, right? So I think there's a lot of that, and there's also a lot of human contact elements. That's going to be an area for job creation. But I think the most important thing is, if we want to stave off Robocalypse, we have to address the entitlement problem, or else that crushes everything. And if we want to make sure we move towards a Robotopia, we have to make sure that we have a population that's increasingly getting better access, more access to various kinds of education. Formal, informal, certifications, degrees, trade schools, everything. And that will determine where we end up. And I would say one thing on this point, too, about something like universal basic income, because no one's brought this up and people love to talk about it, right? And I had somebody tweet at me recently, and it was something like, people think this is going to work. It's great. And there's people that really thought it would work. And if the USSR still existed, I would ask them, right? But this is Marxism. That's all it is. And it doesn't work, because if we look back in time, imagine if everyone who was a smith or a miller or a weaver or a tanner in the 1850s got free handout from Western European monarchies and the US government, and they just, here, freebie, we know your business is gone, here's money forever. What would our economy look like today if those smiths, which are 1% of the population, were just getting UBI? Sure.
Super fast, right? So yeah, it's fascinating, right? We got Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg talking about this UBI. It sounds crazy. And the question is it different this time? Everyone's, it's buzz. It's a big question.
Never different this time.
And, that's a good question, right? I guess we have to ask. It'd be fun to think. What question would Elon Musk ask here? What question would Mark Zuckerberg pose, right? And it's tough, right?
The vanguard of the new proletariat. Look, non-workers of the world unite. This is like this. No, it doesn't work. You stifle economic growth. The only solution is increasing people's access to education, and that will create the opportunity. The opportunities are out there. There's deficits right now in a number of different professional fields for people, and healthcare being one of them, because of again, playing the demographic play, right? But if you just give everybody UBI, that doesn't solve the problems. That creates inflation, right? So.
Good job in the long run, unfilled liabilities, right? It gets down to an interesting question. Machine learning can very accurately mimic human behavior. It's interesting, and yeah, a lot of those jobs you listed.
And the last, I want to make one last point on UBI, and then we got to wrap it. And the last point I'd say is, y'all live in New York, so this is an easier story, right? What happens in bars and nightclubs or anywhere where you might get bottle service the week that investment bankers get their bonuses, right? Price goes up, place is full. What happens in the economy the week everybody gets their UBI check? Okay? Just think about that. All you're going to get is inflation. And that's it. I got to wrap it, folks. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.